So again, so defining what it is that we're really discussing in this context, I think of, and I think it's correct, as a copilot, as in the context of software or computer-led processes, a piece of functionality that gives you another window into the thing or that you are looking at. So in the context of Senseye, for example, the predictive maintenance platform, the copilot is an additional way, arguably will become the main way, but an additional way of looking into the data that augments it with a greater, more worldly understanding of maintenance, etc. But the fundamental important point of it is that it's conversational and you can have a chat with it about the thing in front of you. So it kind of brings the platform to life, but it doesn't do your job.
Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast, powered by Siemens. And now your host, Niall Sullivan.
Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. It's been a little while, but I'm really pleased to welcome back Nat Ford, a regular on the podcast. So welcome back, Nat.
I know. Thanks for having me.
No, fantastic to have you back. I guess for regular listeners, we've done a pretty regular thing over the past few years. We've been running a podcast, The Truth About Predictive Maintenance. So I think we might be under that banner today, but we're actually extending our we're always looking to extend our topics out from that. And today we're talking about copilots and what copilots mean, both from in industrial settings, which we know Siemens supports lots of different copilot use cases, but also how that relates to what we're doing in our personal life, which I know Nat is a passionate advocate for the use of it. I'm starting tentatively to get into it as well, and just where the crossovers are and how they sort of link together, I guess. But what I'm going to do is, again, something we do quite regularly is I'll give Nat the platform to sort of set the scene of where we're going to go and what we're going to talk about. So we'll do that first, and then we'll dive into the topic. So over to you, Nat.
Thanks. No, thanks. And again, thanks for having me again. Hi, everybody. Let's do a big fat disclaimer at the beginning of this session. So we're going to be talking about copilots. Copilots are relatively new on the scene, and undoubtedly in a year from now they will have changed. So cliche alert, the only constant is change. But that said, let's have a chat today about what these new emerging copilots are good for, what they do, what they help with, what they're not. Picked out a few examples actually of other industries of where they've used, so we can talk about the impact they have on different jobs and roles. And I think it's an interesting conversation to have, because I'm like all new technologies, there's a lot of expectation in the market, a lot of hype, sometimes a bit of disappointment. So it's good to be clear in our minds on what it is that a copilot should be, so that when we're talking to our client base about our copilots, we're fair and reasonable, measured, and we know what we're talking about. So interesting times to be in sales, where there's new emerging technologies that we're actually embedding in and making use of within our product set, because you're part voyeur, part consumer, and also then going out and evangelizing and talking about things. So it's interesting times. But just to loop that back to my opening statement, this is today my views, your views, representative of nothing but whatever's going on in our head at the moment, but should be, if anyone's interested in listening, an interesting conversation about where we're at in the minute. Yeah,
it's our sort of interpretation based on all the conversations we're having with various different people, and yourself in your case with customers, which is actually where I wanted to start. So when you're talking to clients and customers and potential customers, what are they actually saying when we're bringing up the topic of generative AI or copilots? What's in their minds at the moment, which is obviously most important?
Yeah, you put two things into one bag there, and they do belong in the same bag, but actually they're perceived very differently. Okay. My perception is they're perceived very differently in the market. So that for the sake of this, let's agree that Gen AI is a blanket term. When you go to ChatGPT and get some fancy picture made for a slide deck, you could argue that that's a copilot, but the copilots that we're talking about today are the ones which are self-proclaimed copilots. Or maybe that's a bit too sci-fi. The makers of them have proclaimed that they are copilots, and they're there to assist with the process. So let's differentiate, because there's all, I do stuff with ChatGPT all day, every day. but this is very much about an extra layer of something which assists with an existing product, I'd say. But anyway, to your question, I think we've had a couple of things have happened. There's a re-emergence in the market of the great fantasists, people who think that finally computers can do everything and anything, who have somewhat unreasonable demands and expectations from vendors like us. And at the other end of the scale, there's people who don't really know. This is more the norm. People don't know what value something can bring. So, as is always the case, it's our job to go and help them understand what extra value there is by using a copilot. So to summarize that, there's an extra layer to our role now when it comes to things like copilots, which is tempering fantasy and helping people to understand the art of the possible.
And so I guess it's this with any sort of, if you talk about technology and software in general terms, because there's always sort of early adopters, right? The people are, I mean, you maybe described yourself as that, as someone who uses ChatGPT every day. So there's that difference you're saying between the people who are like, get it straight away and want to implement it everywhere, personally, professionally, and whatever, and the others who are still either skeptical or don't just, what is it? I don't really know what you're talking about, kind of thing. So there's a big difference between those two groups, let's say.
There is. Let's talk about it. What do I use copilots for? So on a day-to-day basis, I use all the probably the best known, the Microsoft Copilot, and I use it for fact checking. I use it for gathering information that's going to help augment or make better communication. I use it for ideas for slides. I use it for notes summary, and I hasten to add, for anybody who's worried about me summarizing notes in the conversation you've had with me, we have an internal system which is, will not take information that we put in and make it generally available. So it's ring fenced. So it's a professional version of the Microsoft platform. But I find it increasingly useful. I think there's a place and a role for that type of tool sitting there, augmenting everyday activities, making us all slightly better at the things that we do and faster at the things that we do. I also do all the other stuff, like getting it to write poems and songs and ridiculous pictures. But I suspect that will wear off in time. That's a kind of novelty factor, isn't it? What about you? Do you have a daily usage of your Copilot?
Yeah, so I'll talk from both sides of the coin. So professionally, it sort of transformed. Actually, because we're doing a podcast right now, it's the perfect use case. Where before I'd sit around and think about the perfect questions to ask you, Nat, or other people I'm interviewing. Now I just ask ChatGPT. I've got this subject. I've got this person. Think of 10 questions. And the good thing is the questions, as you know, for me, they're not meant to be a script, but they're meant to be like where the conversation dips and dives and comes out of, and we might skip some. So it just gives me a general flow. I can send someone, say, these are the questions we're probably going to ask to get you thinking. That takes 10 seconds versus maybe half an hour. It sounds like a lot, but sitting down and thinking about it. So it saves all that time. Yeah. We then summarize it afterwards. So we take the transcript and summarize it. I'm using internal tools that you described there to summarize the conversation, bullet point it, take out key quotes and things like that. So it's just again, the time saving is off, for the whole team, not just me, included on the editing side too.
That's a bit concerning now, because given that I then used the Copilot to give me all the answers I'm going to say, then we could really cut out the middlemen, me and you. But actually, that brings me to a point. We had an internal session across the business talking about different usages of different platforms, and I had a fantastic use case that somebody put forward, which was prior to giving a presentation, he'd taken the topic and asked it to be discussed by, those, it's not Copilot per se, but the platforms that will do a mock-up webinar like this with a couple of fake Null, a fake Nat. And whilst he's not expecting any quality, the point is it prompts his thinking. So by sitting and listening to that for 20 minutes, by the time he's listening to that, it's given him all of that sort of all of those different topics and footholds to be able to then go and have an interesting conversation. I thought it was a great use. And there are no rules, right?
No, exactly, and that sort of springs an interesting point in my eyes. That the fact you can create a podcast, which, and I remember you sharing that, is again quite scary because I love doing podcasts, but it did sound scarily. If you weren't in the know, you probably would think it was. You probably would think it was two real life people chatting about a subject, but and I guess that's part of it as well. In a couple of ways, about do you believe what the AI is telling you? And we can talk about this from a personal perspective. I was actually speaking to someone from a Gartner analyst earlier this morning. We talked about this, how, you can ask questions, and unless you know the answer, you just believe it, right? You just believe whatever it tells you, because that it's a great tool, right? So I'm thinking of the angle to take this, but if we talk about industrial copilots, including Senseye's Copilot, how do we sort of differentiate between what's believable, so it's not just hallucinating, I think it's the term, right? And how do we sort of navigate that with customers?
It's a globally used term, right? I've never been convinced by the use of the word hallucinating, because it suggests that one thing is hallucination whilst another thing is clear thought, and I don't think either are true about any form of Gen AI. They're just simply putting together words in response to a cue. But within Siemens, all of the copilots that we use that sit on top of some kind of Gen AI are ring-fenced, and they will only talk about the things that they are supposed to talk about. They are based on the information that has been made available to them for the purpose of the function they fulfill. So I'm sure there's probably it's emerging technology, right? But we as an organisation, we've put in place the things you need to. So it's not going to go off and start giving you spurious statistics or spurious facts. We probably need one of our data scientists on a call to discuss that and give a full fat answer. But I think in the everyday use, absolutely. I was trying to have some interesting conversation with a member of my family recently, and I asked a given Gen AI platform if it could tell me interesting things that happen in a second at a kind of macro universal level and a micro level. So it gave me a bunch of facts about things that happen, like numbers of stars born, numbers of stars that die, the amount of rain that falls on planet Earth, and things like cell division within your body. And when I fact checked it, it was a beautiful response, but almost everything it was incorrect at some level. But then, hey, if you ever, you read a newspaper, if you've ever been involved in a story and you know the inside, it's almost always factually incorrect. So maybe it's much better in those contexts than we give them value for. But I think let's steer back in from that conversation, because that's a kind of a human-wide problem, and within industry, we have ways of resolving that. And let's think then about why do we want to have copilots in our life? We all know how to do what we do, don't we? So what is a copilot? So again, so defining what it is that we're really discussing in this context, I think of, and I think that's correct, as a copilot as in the context of software or computer-led processes, a piece of functionality that gives you another window into the thing or that you are looking at. So in the context of Senseye, for example, a predictive maintenance platform, the Copilot is an additional way, arguably will become the main way, but an additional way of looking into the data that augments it with a greater, more worldly understanding of maintenance, etc. But the fundamental important point of it is that it's conversational and you can have a chat with it about the thing in front of you. So it kind of brings the platform to life, but it doesn't do your job. Should we jump in and talk about things that it can be and isn't? Or did you have other things you wanted to discuss first?
No. Let's go into it. Let's go straight into it. Yeah.
Okay. So let's think about what it isn't first, or shouldn't be, right? So we can't determine any truths on this. This is our opinions. But a Copilot, I think, we talk about being conversational, but it's not a chatbot, right? Just answers questions. It's something that should interact and help you do stuff. It definitely shouldn't be a replacement for human judgment. And if you think of that in the context of Senseye, It's not there to make decisions about maintenance. It's there to enhance your decision-making process. It isn't. We've mixed this up a little bit this morning. We've talked about generic Gen AI products and copilots, but it's not generic Gen AI. A copilot should be specifically created for and trained on specific use cases, and become an expert in a very specific field and help. I mean, it could be other things, but I think that's the sort of best delivery. It shouldn't be, if we're talking about it being augmenting by being an interface, it shouldn't just be another dashboard. It should be more than that, sit inside the workflow and be part of, be on your side as opposed to being the dashboard. Everybody now is talking about agentic AI. It shouldn't be autonomous. It should be, it's still a window into your data for you, right? I think that's probably a pretty good premise of things it shouldn't be. Oh, well, let's add as well the thing that we always have to add about predictive maintenance. It's not magic. It's underpinned by logic, good data, good design, good human input, all those things.
Yeah, and to your point, at the end of the day, if you don't take action from it, but it's like it's like talking in the Senseye code. If you don't take action from it, then it's not much use, right? So it's actually I've always loved that positioning of decision support, not this is going to happen at this exact time kind of thing. It's always another tool in the toolbox. I think one of our customers once described to me, which I quite like.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Another way of getting more value out of the platforms that you're using and getting more value out of you. Actually, that's a good way of putting it. So you're getting more value out of the platform and more value out of yourself as a user.
Yeah, and that's where the personal. And you're right. We have sort of put generative AI and copilots in the same bucket. Maybe that's a good thing because maybe people do put it in the same bucket and just interchangeably use them. So we're sort of breaking that apart a little bit and defining that a little bit for people because maybe I'm using it interchangeably, so maybe I've got a little bit to learn there, but it's important to distinguish between the two, right?
It's difficult, isn't it? Because there's things like ChatGPT. It's just not easy to say, but it's become a standard shorthand for all different platforms which are generative AI. Generative AI is not necessarily an understood term, and then when you come to the Copilot, because of the success of one organization, that's what everybody thinks it is. But really, it's a generic term that refers to anything that's a copilot, sits within a system. So let's hope that over the next year, these terms consolidate themselves and we get some general market agreement on what things are. We can try and drive that, but
But I think it's interesting you mentioned that because you think something like Google is just synonymous with searching the internet, right? So it could be that, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue like it's in the same way, but let's ChatGPT. Which it doesn't. Google's well done to their naming and branding because that just rolls off the tongue perfectly, doesn't it? But but maybe it'll evolve into another name, or maybe they'll think about that a little bit more. But at the moment, you're right. When people think of that, it's ChatGPT, which gives them a strong position in the market, I guess.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I was wondering that. So you're obviously, personally, quite what I describe as like an advanced user. And again, with my conversation this morning with a Gartner analyst, he was talking about using it in a personal context as like a novelty. I know you mentioned about creating poems and so you do that as well. But and I know our colleague Alex uses it. I remember him saying like planning an itinerary for a holiday and all sorts of things. It's amazing stuff. Do you have a feeling, both in a personal and a professional environment, with something like Senseye, like when it's going to become sort of more naturally day to day? Maybe that's a harsh question to ask. None of us know, right? But
exactly, and you can only sort of shine your personal torch as far as it shines. So if I had to assert a truth about the rest of the world based on people I interact with on a daily basis, which is you lot and my family, I'd say everybody's using it all the time. My wife is an amazing user of Chat, or Ken as we call him. She talks all about I don't know, any issues that we have in the house that we need to resolve, anything to do with the cats, anything to do with education, anything to do with how things work, we tend to turn to chat. If we're discussing plants and what we want to we'll put the camera on. Maybe we're addicted. I don't know. I don't know.
You don't actually talk to each other anymore. You just use ChatGPT to communicate now.
Yeah, it's when you get told to shush because they're chatting. That's a bit too much, right? But again, so let's swing that back into the workplace stuff. Given that these things are amorphous and can be anything, let's talk about really what they should be. So, if I think about the tools that I use at work, which fall under the term Copilot, and if I think about the intention of the Copilots that we've created for our platform and other Siemens platforms, I think that really the first thing that's true about is they're an AI system, aren't they? That works alongside you. They're not replacing you. It's a tool that works alongside and augments you. The thing that makes them different from previous types of solutions is that they understand your context and are, in theory, offering intelligent suggestions based on the information that you have access to, but it can consume faster in real time. So you're using it as a kind of extension of your existing intelligence, aren't you? The reason they're so fantastic, the reason that I adopted them faster than my family have, and that I see it around me work, is because they use natural language, and we all know how to chat. That's what we're doing now, right? So I shouldn't say this on the podcast, but my nickname at work is Mr. Bean, because whenever I stand up to give a presentation, I can't get the projector to work, whatever it might be. But I don't have that issue with a Copilot because it's intuitive, and if I can't work out how to use it, I'll ask it. Also, if you think about it, when most systems you interact with, if you ask for an answer, you get an answer, but that's the end of it. With a Copilot, you get to explain its answer. So you can, that iterative back and forth conversation, that natural language, that natural inquisition is exactly as you would need it to be able to keep driving until you get something. But of course, they're more than just a chat, so they can do deep data analysis. I think sometimes you can use them things like drafting reports or looking at slides. I think they're not quite there yet for that sort of thing. I think there's definitely a boundary to the stuff they're good at, which is probably a good thing.
I think just one example where I think it might have been the first light bulb moment where I was like, wow, this is actually really amazing. It's actually when I uploaded an image of a slide, which I just wanted to interview. Actually, it was when I did an interview with one of our customers, BlueScope. I just had a slide I wanted to upload and just say, I thought, I won't be able to do this. And I was like, can you put together 10 questions based on this slide? And it just pulled all the information out. It was wonderful. And I was like, now this is really good stuff. This is game changing. I think you said life changing, maybe life changing, but game changing in terms of how we do content and stuff, but not in the way, typical marketing way. It's you can create blogs and all this kind of thing. But the way I see it, I've always been a better editor than creating stuff from scratch. So for me, tools like this are brilliant. So it'll come up with the initial idea, then I go, okay, I'm going to change that, update that, tweak that, and it's done. So as an editor, a stronger editor.
Yeah. So it does 80% of the heavy lifting, and then it leaves you to be the expert on putting the bits together you want. That's probably a good moment then. Should we have a quick step outside of our industry and just look at 3 or 4 examples of Copilots that are emerging in other markets, and then we see if there's any common themes about what it is they're achieving.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So just before, in a hurry, when I was getting my coffee for this call, I asked, well, you guess who I asked. I asked for some examples of Copilots at work, and the first one that came up, no surprise, was 365 Copilot. That I'm sure many people listening. I say that like we've got 100,000 people listening. Thousands of the people listening will see it on their screen right now.
Yes.
But I think, so everybody have a view on that. But I think the legal industry is an interesting one, because For a whole bunch of different reasons, have not been great adopters of new technology. They haven't had to be. Suits their purpose, probably not to be. But also in the legal industry, the structure of companies means they're not structured in the same way as organizations that might have drive to adopt new technology. But also a lot of the tasks they do that they get paid for, where's the encouragement to speed up? Anyway, before I comment too much on the industry that much about, there are now things like Harvey Copilot, which assist with all those things like legal documentation, drafting of contracts, checking documents, checking legal drafts. I can imagine that must be hugely important, useful, and changing. But also, to your point earlier, must require some serious and knowledgeable eyes to check the work. Once that fits in, that's amazing. Hopefully next time I buy or sell a house, the Copilot you can use for doing all your legal paperwork rather than spending 6 months waiting for people to back and forth beyond your control.
Now that is that is a great use case, so I could sign up to personally. Having gone through that, well, not for a few years, but yeah, I remember it very well.
Oh, it's terrible, isn't it? You're a control freak at work. I don't say you, but one could be a control freak at work and expect to understand the processes around you and see where you can either assert control or request for people to do things faster. And then you get into buying a house and it's a tearful process, Niall.
But the thing is, we link it, but again, because we're talking about, of course, representing Siemens here, we talk about solving customer challenges, but again, we want to solve for the same reasons. The reason why it'll be adopted in everyone's personal lives is when it starts solving real life challenges like that, where people know that there's a lot of complexity. That's not a word. Complexity. Yes. That's the word. I couldn't get my words out. But yeah, complexity around things like like moving house and these things, or comparing insurance providers. Although I know there's providers that do that, but for those type of painful activities, which everyone's busy and lots going on, you just want to make it even a little bit easier. If you can take 5% off what it is, and that's still a big step forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But also something guiding you through a process, so you can ask questions like, why this, what's that for, where does it go, what's the normal process in natural language. The next one that came up is one that used to be close to my heart. So I started years and years ago, sort of 35 plus years ago, using products like Quark Express for doing image editing in the very, very early days of graphic design being done on computers. But now, of course, we are all a lot of us are consumers of images that have been helped in the curation and creation of by things like Adobe Copilot. Again, that must be a game changer. If you're using an image platform and now you've got a friendly assistant that understands the tool back to front, and you're trying to work out how to, I don't know what people are doing these days. When I was using it, it was all about how to select one area, not another, so you could cut it out or change it or whatever. But I imagine that that will really speed things up, coupled with the fact that you can use Gen AI platforms to create images. Yeah, maybe I think some people in your life are in that world. I wonder if they have started using things like that, Copilots for image generation or creation or editing.
Yeah, so it's not something we're doing within Siemens at the moment, but I was at a marketing conference a few weeks ago, and I saw a presentation, and it was a company that, they've teamed up with a couple of companies teamed up. One that's focused on typography, so creating custom typography for all the biggest brands around the world. And you think I'm just going to give a random example, like a bottle of Jack Daniels, other brands available, but a bottle of, and it's not just the logo on the front, but there's loads of different type for the ingredients and for the, for various different parts of it. So it's quite complex. It's really interesting to hear that. But they have teamed up with a company that does exactly what you said for marketers, where you could create ads like you normally do, and then within seconds you can ask for variations on the text, on the on the images, create new images for this and this, and it's just in seconds. So it's you have to have the design, and there's obviously brand guidelines for all the biggest companies around the world, but it's the ideation and stuff. You don't have to sit around and think, what image do I want? Oh, I'm just going to describe what I think I want. Yeah.
Presumably, the easiest thing to do would be to teach your Copilot about the brand guidelines.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, you could feed it. Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And so, so from a marketing point of view, I thought, again, rather than sitting around or a creative person, it's not, again, taken away from that, because you still need oversight and skill in that area, but it's just making some of those aspects quicker and providing more variations, because we're constantly wanting to test and try different ads and different text and all various different variations, but this can do it almost at a click of a button, which again is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do one more example. So there was one about e-commerce, but let's not talk about that. There's I think learning. This one's about learning. And yesterday, I don't know why I was doing this. It's a slightly sort of odd thing to do, but I was reading a post by a colleague of ours, which was written in Portuguese. I was reading it to ChatGPT to see if, in my case, she could translate it back into English as a test of how well I was pronouncing the words that I didn't know. Massively useful use of my time. No, she was really sweet and said that I was very, very good. That's kind of her. But of course, the example that came up was Duolingo, which we all see advertised all over the place. And as you say, other platforms available, but they've got a Copilot. Makes complete sense. Of course, they've got a Copilot. That must totally change that interaction, because you're no longer listening to a word and then saying it again and then getting a ping for correct. You've got basically an assistant or someone new. They always say, if you want to learn a language, go and speak it. Well, you can now, can't you? Go and speak it to a Copilot.
And actually, on that use case, I've used a competitor product in the past, and I don't think that they might do now, but they didn't have a sort of a Copilot functionality necessarily. But what they did is create like an AI. I guess not, don't want to call it an AI agent, but an AI representation. So you could have a conversation like we're doing now, but with an AI person in practice, you're speaking as well, which again is a game changer, because the only speaking part in those apps before, I guess, was it reads something out loud and you respond and stuff, and now it feels like you're talking to a person, like learning with an actual tutor, an AI tutor, as it were. Yeah.
Let's do a bit that's more akin to our day jobs, which is, in your case, marketing, in my case, developing new business for Siemens. Let's talk about what we used it for, because actually what I found interesting in looking at those examples is that Siemens have a really, really good and wide-reaching set of use cases, because what Siemens, we're uniquely positioned in a lot of ways. We sell a lot of hardware and we sell a lot of software. So we're firmly straddled between OT and IT. So if you think about a traditional factory, it has to be designed, machines have to be built, they have to be deployed, the usage has to be optimized, and breakdowns, etc., which is our end of it, our specific end within the Senseye department, need to be understood. And if you can have technology, if you can have software that is understanding the hardware, and a Copilot that enables you to interact on those things. So basically, a fleet of Copilots which are specifically built for industries, so industrial Copilots. That's huge, right? It means you can walk into a factory and you can literally speak. I mean, this is a bit sort of sci-fi way of putting it, but you can effectively talk to your factory. You can, and I'm encouraged as I look across the business and have demos of other products from within Siemens, that we're all being very thematically similar in our deployment of Copilots and the way they look and feel, which is so cool. I mean, if you're a Siemens, I'm just hearing myself speaking, and I sound like I've gone into. I'm speaking from the heart, by the way, not as a salesperson. I try to sound everything at the end of this. But it is just really cool because your users can now go in and they can talk about design of a line. They can speak to the platform about the processes. And in our case, they can speak to a machine about a case that has been raised on it and has it happened before, and what did we do last time? What should we do this time? And it's drawing on information from us, from Senseye, and the stuff that we do, the old AI that we use, or the original AI we use for inferring something about machines. It can use all of the documentation specific to a machine, so it becomes an expert on everything in the manuals, the guides, the stuff from the OEE. It can use all the information that's learned from the individuals who work on those machines, so it becomes remembers everything that's ever said to it and can bring that back into conversation. And of course, it's also got access to everything that the human race has ever learned and transcribed and written down and codified on the internet. So it's you're giving a voice to a process that suddenly means that a maintenance person or a plant manager or whoever can make some really robust inquiries. That's pretty amazing, I think.
Yeah, it is, and it's when you say it's interesting to use that term sort of original. Because it's like, how else do you describe it? What Senseye was originally built on, but and we talk about we're talking about copilots today, but in terms of the development of the Senseye platform, there was sort of a step in between, which when we launched the Copilot, I interviewed Dan Reed, our colleague who, the head of product, the guy responsible for the Senseye product, but he made a good point. There's a stepping stone before that, which is equally as brilliant in terms of there's a summary, an instant summary in the natural language of what's happening, which for me was, and for him as well, he was like, in fact, that's a huge step forward. So not looking at graphs and having to interpret and wonder, what does that mean? Does it mean this or that? Even though I'm not saying the product's very intuitive, but it's just making it even easier. It's like you look at it and go, okay, 4 bullet points and they're suggested this potential action. That's it. I can just go away and do that. But obviously with the addition of a Copilot, if there's something in there where, that makes sense, but actually I have another question about it, they can do that now. So it's adding these layers on, as I would describe it, maybe.
No, you're right. And I think that their view, and we have yet to prove it or disprove it, was that a Copilot should be good enough that it summarizes everything you need to know, leaving you with no need to ask questions. However, my conjecture would be that people only hear and learn things when the context is right, and the context usually comes through conversation. When I say the context, I mean whatever you have loaded up in your brain at any given moment. So it is absolutely the case that originally looking at a graph, it's graph. You need to read it, understand it, infer something, and that first stage they put in is brilliant because you're right. It summarizes. It's the kind of Copilot starting the conversation. It summarizes the case and gives you the information you need and an explanation. But quite often an explanation doesn't mean anything until you've gone, you imagine it live. You go, hang on, wait, back off a minute. Sorry. So you're talking what? You're talking about the X asset. And what happened? Do you say what happened? That's how we interact, right? We make people give us information at the pace that we're going to consume it best. And then we go, okay, I get you. Right. Well, has it happened before? And then you can start your dialogue. So I think their endeavor is right, but I suspect that human nature will overrule it, and there'll always be, now that it's available, use of and a need for the Copilot.
And there's also there's also a wider benefit to that as well, because it's something we talk about, capturing knowledge and things like that. So the more you interact with the Copilot, the more it learns, even if it's I say a negative thing, if it's not quite correct, because as we say, it's not magic, things aren't perfect, humans or Copilots isn't perfect. So the more you interact with it and feedback, good, positive, add your own thoughts into stuff and add your own perspective, the more it will learn better the next time, right? So continuous learning. So I guess it's all right with you, Nat. I guess we're coming to the conclusion here, but we always like to leave a little bit of a sort of a takeaway for people. So what if people are hearing and we can bring it back to ourselves, predictive maintenance, Copilot, Gen AI. How should people navigate this and cut through the noise a little bit, I guess, is a nice way to finish.
Probably by asking the question, what can you do for me? So, confronted with a Copilot, ask it, what can you do for me? What are you here for? I imagine there's all sorts of systems that we haven't used recently that we're going to go back into and find that they've been equipped with a Copilot, probably worth inquiring. I think generally people are going to have to slightly stop expecting an instruction manual and to do things ABC 1, 2, 3, because the very nature of Copilots is that they allow you to think and ask questions in the way that is natural for you. So people are just going to have to, so that's an expression my gran used to use, nobody's going to have to do anything. People would do well to start off by thinking that anything is possible, let's go and inquire, rather than looking for the guidelines when interacting with Copilots.
Yeah. So yeah, as I see it as well, it's about being inquisitive, right? So I mean, that's part of the thought process. But how do I use this? But you don't need to think. Don't overthink it too much. Just play with it. Ask questions. That's how I've personally found out. Personally, how to get the most out of these things is just push it and see what it can and can't do. And believe me, like I said, there's a few occasions I've been like light bulb moment. Wow, this is actually this is really powerful stuff. And I can imagine in like I say, in an industrial environment, there'd be similar revelations as well, or realizations.
Yeah, but I think that it's also worthwhile remembering that we're simply at a stage and a phase, and that these things will change. Copilots will probably shift from being, if you want to call them now helpful assistants, they'll probably become more akin to some kind of strategic enabler or industrial transformation or something like that. Who knows what the words would be? But I think they'll become more personalized. You'll have more inputs. They'll become more proactive, probably, in terms of the way they work with you. But it's like a new wave of evolution. These things will reveal themselves over the next months and year or so. But yeah, probably a good time for people to start getting comfortable with using them, so that it's weird to talk about this because we talk about it very generically. I personally was tickled pink when we launched our Copilot because we were early to market, but I think we all knew that we were early to market, but everybody would come to market. So it was a good learning curve for working out what the functions were going to be and why we were doing it and what we expected of it. But yeah, I think generically we should all be getting used to the idea of using Copilots because they're going to be commonplace.
No, absolutely. And what we'll do is, it's hard to say. I was going to say in a year's time, catch up and see where we are, reflect back. But it could be even 6 months' time, or even 3 months' time. I mean, the landscape just changes so quickly. But yeah, for sure, we'll definitely chat about this topic again and see where we are. So fascinating. But yeah, for today, thank you, Nat, for joining us, sharing your thoughts. We won't leave it so long next time.
Thank you soon.
Been great to have you. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels, and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.